Millionaire stunned. When young black girl says, "I'll fix your broken heart," comment below from which city you're watching and hit the subscribe button for more videos. He was a man who could buy anything. Yachts, penthouses, entire companies. Yet, the one thing he couldn't buy was peace. Damien Cross, a billionaire known for his ruthless business empire, was broken in ways no fortune could hide. His wife was gone, his friends were few, and the mansion he returned to each night echoed with a silence that felt heavier than stone. To the outside world, Damien was untouchable, but in truth, he was a man carrying a heart splintered by betrayal, loss, and loneliness. And then came her. It wasn't at a boardroom table or a charity gala. No, he met her on the cracked sidewalks of a forgotten neighborhood, far away from marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A little black girl, no older than 10, stood there with grease-stained hands, fixing the chain of her bicycle. Her clothes were simple, her sneakers scuffed, but her eyes burned with something Damien hadn't seen in years. Hope. She looked up at him, not dazzled by his tailored suit or the sleek car idling at the curb. To her, he wasn't a billionaire, he was just a man who looked tired, wounded, and then, with a voice both soft and unshakably certain, she said words that pierced deeper than any deal or insult ever had. "I can fix your broken heart." Damien froze. For a moment he thought he misheard. He was used to people asking him for things, money, jobs, influence. But this child wasn't asking, she was offering. How could she see his pain when the world's most powerful men couldn't? What followed was a chain of events Damien never could have predicted. That one sentence dragged him into a world he had always ignored, where loyalty meant more than wealth, where brokenness wasn't hidden behind glass towers, and where a girl with nothing could give him something priceless. But not everyone welcomed their bond. Whispers of disapproval rose. Prejudice crept in like a storm, fueled by those who saw their connection as scandalous, dangerous, unacceptable. The higher Damien's life climbed with this girl's strange, healing presence, the more powerful forces pushed to tear it apart. The question was no longer about his fortune, his empire, or his reputation. It was about his heart, and whether he had the courage to let a child mend what the world insisted should remain broken. And in the end, what that little girl revealed about her own past would shock Damien and the world more than anyone could have imagined. Damien Cross was the kind of man headlines adored. Every magazine cover carried his angular jaw, his sharp suits, his empire's latest triumph. His was a face that spoke of control, the man who bought collapsing companies and flipped them into gold mines, who filled city skylines with towers that glittered like monuments to his own ambition. But behind the gleam of success, Damien carried a silence that no article ever printed. His wife, Helena, had left him 2 years earlier, not for lack of wealth, but for lack of warmth. He had given her diamonds, estates, a life most only dreamed of, but never himself. When she walked away, she left behind not just a cold mansion, but a man suddenly aware of his own hollow core. Nights became endless corridors of echoing footsteps and muted screens. The world saw Damien as untouchable. But in the mirror, he saw a man stripped down to his greatest fear, alone. Naomi Carter, on the other hand, lived in a world Damien's polished shoes had never stepped into. Her neighborhood was lined with cracked sidewalks and faded paint, where laughter spilled louder than sirens, and resilience grew like weeds through concrete. She was 10, with a stubborn streak inherited from her mother, and eyes that held a wisdom far older than her years. Her father had left before she could remember. Her mother juggled 2 jobs, and Naomi often found herself responsible for her little brother, Isaiah. She learned early that things didn't get fixed on their own. You had to patch the holes, tie the knots, mend what broke, or nothing survived. That day in early spring, she was crouched beside her bicycle, trying to reattach a chain that had slipped loose again. Her hands were smudged with grease, her forehead streaked with sweat, but she kept at it, muttering, "You're not quitting on me now." That's when Damien's sleek black car rolled slowly down her street. He hadn't planned to be there. Damien's chauffeur had taken a wrong turn, cutting through the neighborhood to avoid traffic on the boulevard. Damien sat in the back seat, scrolling through messages, barely noticing the shift from manicured lawns to chipped porches, until his eyes caught on the small figure bent over a bicycle. Something about her stopped him. Perhaps it was the determination in her hunched shoulders, the way she refused to give up on a machine that looked as worn out as the street around her. Against his better judgment, Damien told the driver to stop. The door opened, polished shoes touched down on gritty pavement, and for the first time in years, Damien found himself standing somewhere that didn't bend to his wealth. Naomi looked up, squinting at the tall stranger in a suit worth more than her family's yearly rent. She didn't flinch, didn't gape. She just wiped her greasy hands on her jeans and asked flatly, "You know how to fix a bike chain?" The question struck him. No one had spoken to him that way in years, without reverence, without fear. Just expectation. "I can't say I do," Damien admitted, voice low. She sighed, shaking her head like an old mechanic. Figures. Grown-ups never know the important stuff. It should have ended there, a passing moment. A wealthy man amused by a child's stubbornness. But then Naomi's gaze lingered, narrowing, studying him as if she could see past his suit, his guarded posture, his expensive watch. "You look broken," she said softly. "I can fix your heart if you want." Damien froze. The world tilted. A child had named the very wound he had buried beneath steel and silence. That sentence carved the first crack in Damien's armor. But this wasn't just a story about a chance encounter. Because with Naomi's words came ripples Damien couldn't yet see. Ripples that would pull him deeper into a world foreign to him, challenge everything he believed about strength, about weakness, about worth. And in a city where lines between rich and poor, black and white, powerful and powerless ran like deep scars, the connection between a billionaire and a little girl was not something society would allow without resistance. Damien didn't know it yet, but the very act of letting Naomi into his life would set him against forces that demanded he choose, protect his empire, or protect the voice that dared to heal him. It began with excuses. Damien told himself he returned to that broken street corner because of unfinished business. He'd dropped his cufflink when he bent to look at Naomi's bike, perhaps, or maybe his driver had forgotten the route. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had been shaken, and he needed to see her again. The following Saturday, Damien's car once more rolled to a stop beside Naomi's block. This time, she was seated on her stoop, legs swinging, a book on her lap. She looked up and smirked. "You again," she said, as though men in $1,000 suits regularly visited her porch. Damien chuckled softly. "Yes, me again. Any bicycles?" "That needs saving today?" "Nope," Naomi replied. "But maybe you do." Her words unsettled him, but they also pulled him closer. He sat beside her, ignoring how the paint peeled from the wood, how the air smelled faintly of fried food and exhaust. It was the first time in years he had chosen discomfort over control. Over the weeks that followed, Damien returned again and again. At first, he told no one. These visits were his secret, his lifeline. Naomi began to ask him questions no adult dared. "Why do you look sad when you're supposed to be rich? Do you have any friends, or just people who want your money? What do you think happens when people die?" Damien answered clumsily, sometimes avoiding, sometimes confessing truths that startled even himself. And in return, Naomi shared pieces of her own world, how her mother worked double shifts at the diner, how she tucked her brother in each night, with stories she made up on the spot, how she wanted to be a mechanic, a poet, or maybe both. For the first time in years, Damien laughed without forcing it. But word travels fast, especially when the rich step into worlds they aren't meant to touch. One evening, as Damien left Naomi's block, his driver muttered under his breath, not realizing Damien heard. Strange company for a man like him. The following week, Damien's business partner Victor Hale called him out at their private club. "You're becoming a story, Damien," Victor said, swirling his whiskey. "People are asking why the great Damien Cross is wasting time in, let's say, less prestigious neighborhoods. It's none of their business," Damien replied flatly. But it was. For men like Victor, reputation was business. Soon, photographs began surfacing. Grainy shots of Damien sitting on a stoop beside Naomi, his tailored suit in stark contrast to her scuffed sneakers. The images circulated through social media, then into gossip blogs. The commentary was swift and brutal. What's he doing there? Is he grooming some charity case? A man like that doesn't belong in a place like this. The ugliness of prejudice dripped between the lines. Few said it outright, but many implied. What was a wealthy white businessman doing spending so much time with a young black girl? Damien read the headlines with a mixture of rage and shame. Rage at the world's cruelty, shame at himself for caring. Naomi, however, was unbothered. It began with excuses. Damien told himself he returned to that broken street corner because of unfinished business. He'd dropped his cufflink when he bent to look at Naomi's bike, perhaps, or maybe his driver had forgotten the route. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had been shaken, and he needed to see her again. The following Saturday, Damien's car once more rolled to a stop beside Naomi's block. This time she was seated on her stoop, legs swinging, a book on her lap. She looked up and smirked. "You again?" she said, as though men in $1,000 suits regularly visited her porch. Damien chuckled softly. "Yes, me again. Any bicycles? That need saving today?" "Nope," Naomi replied. "But maybe you do." Her words unsettled him, but they also pulled him closer. He sat beside her, ignoring how the paint peeled from the wood, how the air smelled faintly of fried food and exhaust. It was the first time in years he had chosen discomfort over control. Over the weeks that followed, Damien returned again and again. At first he told no one. These visits were his secret, his lifeline. Naomi began to ask him questions no adult dared. "Why do you look sad when you're supposed to be rich? Do you have any friends or just people who want your money? What do you think happens when people die?" Damien answered clumsily, sometimes avoiding, sometimes confessing truths that startled even himself. And in return, Naomi shared pieces of her own world, how her mother worked double shifts at the diner, how she tucked her brother in each night, with stories she made up on the spot, how she wanted to be a mechanic, a poet, or maybe both. For the first time in years, Damien laughed without forcing it. But word travels fast, especially when the rich step into worlds they aren't meant to touch. One evening, as Damien left Naomi's block, his driver muttered under his breath, not realizing Damien heard. Strange company for a man like him. The following week, Damien's business partner, Victor Hale, called him out at their private club. "You're becoming a story, Damien," Victor said, swirling his whiskey. "People are asking why the great Damien Cross is wasting time in, let's say, less prestigious neighborhoods." "It's none of their business," Damien replied flatly. But it was. For men like Victor, reputation was business. Soon, photographs began surfacing, grainy shots of Damien sitting on a stoop beside Naomi, his tailored suit in stark contrast to her scuffed sneakers. The images circulated through social media, then into gossip blogs. The commentary was swift and brutal. What's he doing there? Is he grooming some charity case? A man like that doesn't belong in a place like this. The ugliness of prejudice dripped between the lines. Few said it outright, but many implied. What was a wealthy white businessman doing spending so much time with a young black girl? Damien read the headlines with a mixture of rage and shame. Rage at the world's cruelty. Shame at himself for caring. Naomi, however, was unbothered. "Why do you care what they think?" she asked one afternoon, when Damien showed her an article filled with insinuations. "Because reputation is power," he snapped, before he could stop himself. "Without it, I lose everything." Naomi tilted her head. "You already lost everything. You just don't see it yet." The words pierced him. He stared at her, realizing she saw through layers of armor no one else could crack. Then came the gala. It was a fundraiser hosted by Damien's firm, meant to display wealth and influence, under chandeliers and crystal. Damien should have kept Naomi far away from such a place. But when he saw her standing at the edge of the street one evening, watching carriages of wealth roll past her neighborhood, he made a reckless choice. "Come with me," he said. Her eyes widened. "To where?" "To see the world that thinks it owns me." Naomi hesitated only a moment before nodding. They arrived together, Damien in his custom tuxedo, Naomi in a simple yellow dress borrowed from a neighbor. The room went still as they entered. Every head turned. Whispers began to hum, sharp as broken glass. Who is she? Did he adopt a child? No, she doesn't belong here. Damien felt the tension coil like a noose. He should have been used to scrutiny, but this was different. The venom wasn't aimed at him alone. It was at her. He guided Naomi to a table, pretending not to hear, but Naomi noticed. Her small hands clenched, her eyes darted nervously. For once, her boldness faltered, and then came Victor. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Victor leaned down beside Damien. You've lost your mind. This isn't charity. It's a scandal waiting to explode. Do you want them tearing you apart? Tearing her apart? Damien's jaw tightened. She's with me. Victor's voice dropped colder. Then she'll be the reason you fall. That night ended in disaster. A journalist snapped a photo of Naomi beside Damien's table, her uncertain eyes framed by the glittering excess around her. By morning, the picture was everywhere. Commentators didn't hold back. Cross parades a child through elite circles. Damien Cross losing grip, using a poor black girl as redemption? This isn't mentorship. It's madness, Naomi saw the coverage. For the first time, she looked shaken. Maybe they're right, she whispered. Maybe I shouldn't be around you. Damien knelt before her, his voice uncharacteristically desperate. No. They're wrong. You've given me something no one else has. You matter more than their noise. Naomi's eyes glistened. Then don't let them take me away. It was the moment Damien realized. This wasn't about protecting his reputation anymore. It was about protecting her. But as pressure mounted, from investors, from the media, from Victor, Damien would soon face an ultimatum. One that forced him to choose between his empire and the only person who had ever told him the truth about his broken heart. And when that moment came, the world would be watching. The storm did not arrive quietly. It came in headlines, stocky, crashes, and whispers so loud they bled into shouts. Damien Cross had built an empire on precision, numbers, deals, and ruthless control. But now, the empire shook. Investors pulled back. Board members called emergency meetings. Even his employees avoided his gaze in the polished halls of Cross Enterprises, as if proximity to him meant contamination. The cause was no secret. Naomi. The photo from the gala had exploded into a cultural firestorm. Talk shows debated his intentions. Pundits framed the image with suspicion. On social media, the debate turned venomous, coded prejudice spilling into open hate. Some voices defended Damien and Naomi's bond, calling it human and rare. But the louder voices screamed scandal, and those voices had money behind them. Victor Hale made sure of that. Damien, Victor said, pacing the conference room, his silver cufflinks flashing like blades. This has to end. Now. The board. Members sat in a semicircle, their faces carved from stone. Men and women Damien had worked alongside for decades stared at him as if he were a stranger. Victor slammed a folder onto the table. Inside, contracts, buyout threats, a media strategy designed to surgically cut Naomi out of Damien's life. All you have to do, Victor said smoothly, is release a statement. Say she's a charity project gone too far. Distance yourself, issue an apology, and this embarrassment will fade. You'll save your company, your name, your legacy. Damien's fingers curled against the table. He looked around, searching for even one sympathetic face. None met his eyes. And if I don't? Damien asked quietly. Victor smiled like a knife sliding from its sheath. Then you fall. That night, Damien sat in his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath him like a kingdom he no longer ruled. Naomi sat on the floor, tinkering with a broken watch she'd found in his study. The small gears clicked beneath her steady hands. You don't look so good, she said softly. Damien tried to smile. They want me to let you go. Naomi's hands stilled. She didn't look up. Are you going to? The silence stretched. For years, Damien had known every answer before the question was asked. Now, he didn't know it all. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. Naomi looked up, her eyes dark and steady. Then don't. Simple words. Impossible choice. The breaking point came 3 days later. Cross Enterprises hosted its annual shareholders summit, a theater of power. broadcast live to millions. Damien knew what it was supposed to be, a performance of confidence, a promise of profit. But this year, it had become something else entirely. As Damien stepped onto the stage, the room buzzed with tension. Cameras flashed, investors leaned forward. And in the second row, to his shock, sat Naomi. She had come, uninvited. She wore her simple yellow dress again, sitting small among rows of silk and tailored suits. She didn't look afraid. She looked expectant, as though waiting to see if Damien would live the words he spoke to her in the shadows. Victor stood just off stage, arms folded, eyes promising destruction if Damien made the wrong move. Damien began his speech. His voice was steady at first, rehearsed. Numbers, projections, stability. The crowd nodded along, eager for reassurance. But Damien's gaze kept drifting back to Naomi. Halfway through, he faltered. His throat tightened. His carefully memorized lines slipped. "Away. This company," he began slowly, "was built on the idea of strength, that numbers and profit are what matter most." He looked down at his notes. Then he looked back at Naomi. But what if strength is something else entirely? What if it's sitting on a broken stoop, finding hope in someone who has nothing to give you, except truth? The audience stirred. Confusion rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed closer. Victor's face darkened. Damien continued. "You all want me to cut ties with Naomi, to deny her, to protect this." He gestured around at the gleaming walls, the empire of glass and steel. "But I won't. Because the truth is, without her, this is all empty, a kingdom built on sand." Gasps erupted. Murmurs swelled into a storm. Victor stormed onto the stage, seizing Damien's microphone. "He's lost his mind. This is not leadership, it's suicide." But Damien didn't back down. He took the mic back, his hands steady. "No," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is the first honest thing I've done in years. And if it costs me everything, so be it." He turned then, not to Victor, not to the board, but to Naomi. "You once told me I'd already lost everything," Damien said. "You were right, but now I've found something worth fighting for." Naomi's eyes glistened. She nodded. Once small, but fierce. The room descended into pandemonium. Investors shouting, reporters scrambling, board members storming out. But Damien stood tall, his empire cracking around him. And through the noise, Naomi's voice rang clear, steady, undeniable. "You are not broken anymore." For the first time in her life, she spoke not in whispers or questions, but in certainty. And every camera, every microphone, every pair of eyes caught the moment. The world had wanted a scandal. Instead, they witnessed a miracle. The summit ended in chaos. Reporters swarmed the exits, board members barked into phones, and shareholders fled as if the empire itself were crumbling beneath their polished shoes. For Damien, it had. By morning, headlines screamed of a meltdown. "Cross self-destructs live on stage," one paper wrote. Stock prices plummeted. Overnight, billions evaporated. Victor Hale capitalized immediately, rallying the board into an emergency coup, positioning himself as the savior who would stabilize the company. For the first time in decades, Damien Cross was no longer in control. And yet, he felt lighter than he had in years. Because for the first time, he had chosen not profit, not image, but truth. In the days that followed, Damien expected silence from Naomi, perhaps even anger. He had, after all, dragged her into the world's harshest spotlight. But Naomi didn't vanish. She appeared at his penthouse door, her little hands clutching a backpack too worn for its age. She didn't say much. She rarely did. But when Damien opened the door, she simply asked, "Are you okay?" Damien almost laughed. Was he okay? He had lost everything. The empire he spent his life building was now under Victor's control. His name was being shredded across networks, painted as unstable, reckless, unfit. And yet, hearing her ask that question, his eyes burned with a strange gratitude. "No," he admitted. "But maybe that's all right." Naomi nodded, then set the broken watch she'd fixed on his counter. Things can work again, even if people think they're broken. But not everyone saw it that way. The prejudice grew louder. In hushed conversations, at restaurants, in venomous online comments, in the stiff way strangers looked at Damien when Naomi was with him. It wasn't just about business, it was about perception, about the audacity of a billionaire choosing loyalty to a black child over loyalty to the expectations of his class. Yet something shifted. The clip of Naomi speaking those words, "You're not broken anymore," went viral. Millions watched the little girl who had been silent for years find her voice at the exact moment Damien defied the world. What the critics tried to twist into scandal, ordinary people saw as a miracle. Letters arrived at Damien's penthouse, thousands of them, from parents of children who struggled to speak, from teachers, from people who knew what it meant to feel voiceless. Naomi had become a symbol far greater than the scandal, and Damien had become her shield. Victor fought harder. He filed lawsuits, froze assets, and weaponized every connection he had to ensure Damien could never rebuild. For a while, it looked like Damien would vanish into obscurity, another fallen giant. But something remarkable happened. Instead of trying to claw back the empire, Damien walked away from it. He sold what little he still owned, severed ties with the company bearing his name, and poured everything into a foundation, Naomi's foundation. Its mission, to amplify the unheard. Children silenced by poverty, prejudice, disability, or circumstance would now have a platform, resources, and advocates. The board mocked him. Victor sneered. But outside their glass towers, the world noticed. The man once known for ruthless deals was now known for something else entirely. Naomi thrived. Her voice, once a whisper, grew stronger. She spoke at schools, at community events, at fundraisers. Each time Damien stood in the back, not as the center of power, but as the man who finally understood that real strength wasn't in controlling people, it was in standing beside them. Their bond drew criticism still, of course. Some would never let go of their prejudice. But Damien had learned to live above the noise. One evening, as they sat in the park where they had first met, Naomi asked him, "Do you miss it? The company?" Damien thought for a long time. The skyline glowed ahead of them, a city he once ruled but no longer owned. "I thought I would," he admitted. "But no, that life was a prison made of glass. This," he gestured toward her, the park, the laughter of children in the distance. "This is freedom." Naomi smiled, a quiet smile, but full of meaning. "Told you I could fix your heart." Damien laughed softly, shaking his head. "You did more than that. You gave it back to me." Damien never returned to his old empire. Victor Hale remained in the headlines, chasing profit and clawing at power. But Damien didn't envy him, because Damien had learned the truth. Empires crumble, legacies fade, but courage, the courage to stand against prejudice, to choose truth over comfort, echoes long after the noise dies. Naomi grew into her voice, and with Damien's support, she built something neither of them could have imagined, a movement. Their story, once ridiculed as scandal, became a parable whispered in classrooms, told in boardrooms, and shared in households around the world. The lesson was clear. Racism destroys families, prejudice weakens communities, but unity brings healing, and courage defeats hate. Damien had once been the loneliest man in the city, but by choosing to stand with Naomi, he had gained something greater than all his billions combined. A voice that wasn't even his own. A little girl's voice. One that the world could never silence again.